Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a not so special, but a new edition of Wrestling Night in America. You may recognize me, Brandon LeClair, from previously co-hosting this show with the original host, Greg Parks. Of course, as regular viewers are aware, Greg stepped down from hosting the show after Bash in Berlin back in August, and we've been on a brief hiatus, but I am here tonight to walk you through tonight's pay-per-view, AEW WrestleDream. And I won't be doing that alone. I'll be doing it with my co-host. I'll bring him on now. Welcome to Tony Donofrio, who's joining me here to go over AEW WrestleDream. Hey, Tony.
Happy to, yeah. Hey, Brandon, glad to be here. It's long night, so
Definitely a very
uh,
long night for
yeah,
sure.
some good stuff to talk about, but looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely an interesting show for sure. There was a lot going on. 9 matches on the main card. We'll go through from top to bottom. But before we get into kind of a rundown, I do want to get your thoughts on that major show closing angle. Obviously, something a bit different that we haven't really seen. Something that where they up the seriousness to this level on AEW TV. But they went really hard. I mean, as I'm sure we'll get into, Excalibur broke down in tears in the final couple minutes of the show. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts to start there, and then we'll get into the show itself.
I did like the serious tone. I thought it was something different for what we've seen from AEW. Um, I think they left you with a good hook for Dynamite. I am intrigued why the belt was thrown into a duffel bag and basically carried out, unceremoniously. So that was very interesting. Excalibur breaking down in the tears might have been a little over the top for me. I noticed it too, and I'm like, at first I thought, did I hear him sound like he was sobbing? And I was like, no, maybe it was just me. And then he spoke again, and I'm like, nope, he's definitely laying it on. But that aside, I mean, I was into it. I know that a lot of people, there was a lot of mixed reaction the last time they did the plastic bag over the head angle.
Mhm.
It didn't bother me. I said that in my hits and misses from on the torch whenever I did that a couple months ago when they did this. What was it? Probably a couple months ago now. Yeah. So, like I said, I'm invested in it. The crowd was in shock. I mean, I think the silence is, you could read it two different ways. I read it as that they were invested and they were into what it was. It's not like they were peppering the ring with trash. I think that would have been worse than the dead silence. I think the crowd was stunned and in a good way. So I thought it was a good closing angle, and I'm invested.
Yeah, I definitely agree there regarding the reaction from the crowd or lack of reaction. I think it was the good kind of silence, and I think that you could tell because I think we also got the bad kind of silence on this show too at other points. So I think it was pretty easy to tell there was definite investment there, and I think there was investment throughout that match. I think that the crowd was really into it from the opening bell and the action before the bell, which is good because there were some pieces there in the middle of the show where things got a little rocky in terms of crowd investment, crowd interest, and even commentary kind of trying to keep up appearances. So they definitely had them for that main event for sure. And I agree. I mean, I don't necessarily love AEW's tendency to just kill Brian Danielson constantly. I mean, like it just seems to be an ongoing thing with them. But I also think that he's an easy guy to build sympathy for, and he's so likable, and it's so easy to get the crowd invested in a comeback story for Danielson. Now, this is a little different because obviously he is, as far as we know, retiring from full time in ring competition. So we'll see how that goes as the weeks and months progress, and see if that is something that he's really committed to and they're really committed to. Obviously, he is going to need to do something with this angle. I mean, they've done so much to build this conflict with Mox and with, the remaining members of the Blackpool Combat Club, that Danielson's going to have to be involved in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I would like to think that Danielson's only going to wrestle twice a year, but I really believe that he is getting that surgery this year. If
Mhm.
we're to believe he's getting neck surgery, I can't imagine he wrestles. We're in October. I can't imagine he wrestles in the next 9 months. So maybe if he gets that surgery this month, we see him back in time for Allin next year in Texas. But yeah, to write him off that way, I mean, they basically in terms of like if you're gonna equate it to something cinematic, you killed off his character. That's really
Yeah.
what they did. I mean, it's or if you do something like that when a guy's leaving the company and going somewhere else. I mean, we know he's leaving for a while, but we don't know for how long. So you would think there's got to have to be some sort of follow up at some point, because that can't be the last time we see Bryan Danielson on AEW television, and I don't think any of us expect that. But it might be a good 9 months before we see him, and at least now you have something for him to come back to that he could sink his teeth into for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll pause here to kind of introduce ourselves and run down the card a bit here. I want to apologize in advance. I do not have access to the Wrestling Night in America email account, at least not yet, anyway. So if anyone has sent emails, we won't get to them because I just don't have access to that account. So if you do have questions or specific things that you want us to talk about, you can put them in the chat on whatever format that you're currently watching on. We are, of course, live on YouTube. I know that many of you will listen to the show afterwards in podcast form, and we certainly appreciate that. And want to thank all PW Torch VIP members as well for joining us, and let them know that they can join us for commentary and comments as well. So again, my name is Brandon LeClair. I am a longtime PW Torch contributor. I cover AEW pay-per-views and WWE premium live events for pwtorch.com. I also am a frequent was a frequent co-host on Wrestling Night in America after pay-per-views, now stepping into the host chair. I also will occasionally join Wade Keller on the PW Torch Pro Wrestling post shows for Raw, SmackDown, and AEW Dynamite. My co-host here to my right on screen, Tony Donofrio, fellow PW Torch contributor. Tony, welcome, and feel free to plug what you do for the Torch.
Yeah. Also a longtime Torch contributor, probably for about 15, 16 years now. Lots of different hits and miss columns over the years. Still doing the AEW hits and misses, so that'll definitely be out before Dynamite hits on Monday. I've been kind of leaning towards getting that out closer to Dynamite as kind of like a refresher for those that did see the show, and for those that didn't, a nice lead in for that. And then in the last year or so, also joined ProWrestling.net. I'm a little behind on that. Jason's probably wondering where my next column is, but life gets in the way sometimes. So that's where you can find my work. And of course, on major social platforms like X/Twitter and threads at Tony Donofrio or Donofrio, as Brandon and Greg and Wade, and they all ask me how to pronounce the name. It's like an ongoing
First thing I asked.
it's an ongoing podcast joke now, and for the last 5 to 10 years, and I appreciate the hell out of it. So it's great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ashley. Yeah,
before we move too far, Ashley in the chat said, "Sweet Mike Tony." For those of you listening afterward in podcast form, Ashley. I'll put up here on the screen. Evening, Tony and Brandon. Still processing how to feel, but I will say putting the title in that black bag was an interesting touch. Almost like they packed it up to deliver it to someone. Yes, I definitely agree. And the way that commentary sort of hammered that point home, I thought was interesting. They almost kind of telegraphed it a little bit. I think it was Shivani who said that he was going to put it in the black bag before he even did it. Did you pick up on that?
I did. I was like, what black bag? And then I maybe a second and a half later, I go, oh, I see it now. I guess, I guess those guys, they did run right in front of the announce table. So in theory, Shivani seeing it first is,
Sure. So yeah, they're definitely setting up something there, and the cryptic way in which Mox has been talking would seem to suggest that they're headed in some sort of direction with there being a higher power of sorts with Moxley and company. So we will definitely talk more about the main event. First, I'm going to do just a quick rundown. We'll get in some talk about the first few matches here, and we'll kind of go in chronological order. So they opened the show with Jay White and Hangman Adam Page. They went, according to my notes, they went just over 16 minutes, 29 seconds. I thought it was a good opener, good way to get things kicked off for the live crowd. Live crowd was into both guys, which was, it's always a little bit concerning to me when you have someone who is supposed to be clearly defined as your heel in Hangman Adam Page, and the crowd is sort of giving you a 50-50 split. Um, I don't love that. I wish that the crowd was more invested in stories rather than cheering specific wrestlers. It's an issue that AEW has had for quite a long time, and I think one that kind of reared its head multiple times on this show, with the exception of the main event. But Tony, what did you think?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think as the match went along, the crowd did lean more into Hangman as the heel, and they started, getting under his skin with the swerve chants and everything like that. But, coming into this match, I was really torn because from a booking standpoint, I really thought neither one of these guys should be losing right now. But I think they went the right way. Jay White has been criminally underutilized in the last
Sure.
18 months since he's been in AEW. So hopefully this is getting him right on the back on the right track. And if anyone can take a loss and keep moving on from it, especially with the story that Hangman's been telling, with his character the last couple of months, it's him. And it's funny that I think it might have been Zach Haydorn on Twitter saying if there's anyone right now that can absorb that loss and still be over and it not affect him, it is Hangman. So I was all for the finish, and I could see maybe this feud continuing. It looked like Hangman still was pretty pissed off after the match, and I don't think it was at anyone else in particular. So I'm willing to see where these two are going, and if it's with them, if the feud goes through the rest of the year, I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, you never like to see someone at the level of Hangman Page eat a loss in an opener on a pay-per-view, given, that he just beat Swerve in the main event in that cage match at All Out, or yeah, All Out. But I think you're right in that, if there's any guy that can kind of take that loss at this point and also help someone maybe get to the next level right now, it might be Hangman Adam Page. And Jay White is a guy who is certainly worth spending a little bit of Hangman's credibility on, because I think they've done wrong by Jay White pretty consistently since his debut in AEW. And so trying to get some steam back behind him, I think, is definitely a good idea overall. I did think that this was, like I said, a strong opener. It worked for what it was, and I do think you're right, Tony. I think that they may certainly go back to this, especially given, I don't see a ton for either guy outside of that right now. And based on the returns that we saw a little later in the show, you can kind of see how that upper mid card field is going to be really crowded here for a
Mhm.
bit. So second match of the night, we went on to the only women's match on the main card, which I thought was interesting. They had been doing a really good job, sort of getting at least two women's matches on the main card, but Mercedes Moné, not on tonight's show, was involved in a backstage segment. Will be wrestling on Dynamite against Queen Aminata, but was not featured on this particular event. So we had Mariah May defending her AEW Women's World Championship against Willow Nightingale. Mariah May retains the title, as you might expect, in about just shy of 11 minutes or so. I thought it was a good match. It was a solid title defense for Mariah May. I think she continues to show how effective she can be in this role, carrying the women's world title picture. And I'm a big Willow Nightingale fan. I think that she has proven herself to be perhaps one of the most over women in the division, and one of the women who has consistently garnered reactions from the crowd, even at times where it's felt like the women's division was an afterthought. So I was glad to see her in this role, even if it did feel like it was just kind of a stepping stone for Mariah May to get on to the next thing. What did you think, Tony?
Yeah, between Willow and Mariah, you could argue they're two women that are the future of that division because, I agree with you. Willow, she is very much she reminds me of Bailey back in her NXT days, where if they ever turn her heel, it's got to be for a backup reason where something definitely went wrong. Because I don't know how she could be someone that you would ever want to turn heel. And Mariah May, she's starting to legitimize herself as a main eventer, and you kind of saw the writing on the wall about 6 months ago. Mariah was starting to get over, and the match, in my opinion, was a very good women's match, and a very good match in general. I don't even have to add the word women's in front of it. And we're going to say that about most of the matches on the card. I can't say there was a bad match on the card, but that doesn't mean that there was the storytelling all was great leading into this. But not a lot to say, but I was very impressed with the match coming out of it for sure.
Yeah, where do you think Mariah May goes from here? I mean, it seems like Tony Storm is probably, the answer at some point, but do you think that her return is imminent, or they might have something else lined up before then?
I think they're trying to just keep her name in the forefront of your mind, but I feel like she's going to be the matchup for the Arthur, or not the Arthur Ashe show. I'm sorry, the show in Australia, the Grand Slam in Australia, which is what,
Mhm.
February. So I
Yep.
wouldn't be surprised if she comes back towards the end of the year and they start something big for Tony and Mariah for that. Until then, I mean, they hinted something with Britt Baker a couple weeks ago at the 5th anniversary show. I don't know if it's just going to be she's going to go through a couple placeholder type challengers until that big feud, and they ultimately do the big blow off between the two of them. But it seems like the Tony's going to be her next, big feud again, and we'll finally get the finality to that. I would imagine it's in Australia because you know Mariah got her big win in England, and I don't know if they're going to put the title back on Tony, but I could see that coming to a head in Australia.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I do think that the division right now is deep enough where they probably have a good number of challengers that they can line up. I think the struggle is going to be like they got into with Willow tonight, is making the challengers feel like they are credible and worthy of a title defense, especially on a pay-per-view, because we sort of had the same issue with Tony Storm when everything was just building to Mariah May. And so everything she did leading up to that kind of felt like it was, you know, just sort of kicking the can down the road until the Mariah May turn and match came along.
And
Um,
and
so
now, yeah, and I would say that problem is not even exclusive to Mariah May. I'd say up and down the card tonight.
yeah.
That's a lot of rushed stories, and I think a big
Hmm.
part of that was if you look at the calendar this year, and I'm hoping it's being adjusted next year for a reason. But if you look at between All In and this show, there was All In, All Out. There was the anniversary show. There was the Arthur Ashe show. There was this show. So many quote unquote big shows in just a couple month period. And it's almost like they had to rush into this pay per view. And I mean, they booked themselves into it. They know when they schedule their shows. So I'm hoping next year we see All In's going to be in July. I'm guessing All Out stays at the beginning of September. you know, Maybe they eliminate the Arthur Ashe show or at least they don't call it Grand Slam, or maybe they move that and we get some spacing next year. Because with, them running, especially now, they know they're running 10, 11 pay-per-views per year. Between that and the big TV show ones they want to do, whether it's the anniversary show or if they want to do an Arthur Ashe show that's not a pay-per-view, they got to space these out, because you could tell tonight There were, and I think it was someone that I respect on Twitter made a good point, and the best way they put it was there was some seeds to good stories tonight that never actually got a chance to grow into good stories. And I feel like that was the story of this card in general, is that there were some things up and down the card where, man, if they'd have had like 2 more weeks into some of these stories, everything would have, all the matches would have came off better. And you mentioned the crowd wasn't very hot. There was nothing wrong with the matches, but I feel like there was not a lot of stories to be invested into for this pay-per-view. And I think we'll probably talk more about that as we get into it.
Yeah, definitely. I think as we get further down the list here, as we get especially toward the middle meat of the show, it just felt like the crowd investment fell off a cliff. It's not that I sat there and thought like, oh man, Tacoma is this really crappy crowd. I know that they faced a lot of criticism, earlier in the week. Spokane got a ton of criticism earlier in the week for being a bad crowd for Dynamite, and now I suspect that we're going to hear a lot of the same thing about Tacoma. But in reality, it just wasn't a show that had a lot to offer in terms of long-term story investment. And
Mhm.
so what ended up happening is that, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like most AEW pay-per-views, you had a lot of good matches up and down the card, but so much of it just felt like your average edition of Dynamite. And so that I think hurt sort of the I don't want to say the credibility of the pay-per-view brand, but in general, it made this feel like if AEW is going to have what we call, in WWE, the B shows, the BPLEs, whatever, this felt like that
Mhm.
outside of the main event. It felt like, hey, we've gone really hard the last couple of shows and we've had a lot of these big dynamites, and we're going to pull back the reins a little bit here. And I think that's easier to do when you're WWE and you have Peacock and people are paying, next to nothing and in many cases, nothing at all to stream your pay per views or your premium live events. But AEW is asking and charging a premium price for these shows. And so it's harder to sort of take shows off. And tonight, they didn't do that for the full totality of the show, but it did feel like there was some of that in the middle, which we'll certainly get to. The third match of the show was a TNT Championship defense. Jack Perry defending his championship against Katsuyori Shibata. This was, another one that it was a perfectly fine match. Shibata has great looking offense. He's got incredibly impressive strikes. The crowd was into the strikes. They were into the comebacks. They were into, Perry's gimmick of being a smarmy heel. But it was relatively quick to set up for the next thing. Tony, what was your opinion of the match? And then we'll transition into sort of the big segment that came out of it.
Yeah, like we stated just a moment ago, the build to this was absolutely rushed. Match itself was fine. Both guys worked really well together. They worked hard. I feel like, if anything, and you just alluded to that as well, the post match to this is what was probably the bigger story of it, because I didn't think Shibata was going to win, and if he did, I felt like it was just going to be for him to hand the title off to Daniel Garcia in a match, because in another match following that, because that's what they were teasing if he were to win. So in my mind, it was a foregone conclusion that Perry was going to retain, or that we were going to get maybe a 3-day title reign for Shibata, and he was going to lose to Garcia on Wednesday. But once the match ended the way it did, and the attack happened, in my mind, I saw what was coming next with Garcia. And then it's funny, in my mind I'm like, oh man, Garcia came out, and then oh, here you could just foresee it coming. And I'm surprised they could have really, I think, done this with a bigger audience on television on Wednesday, or at least for one of those, one of the two surprises we got coming up, which, like I said, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about it in a minute anyway. But I feel like the post match definitely overshadowed the match itself.
For sure. And I'm going to toss right back to you to talk about that. I just want to give a quick rundown of what went down in the post match scrum, if you will. So after Jack Perry retains, Shibata's shoulders are pinned to the mat unceremoniously in a hold. It's kind of a schmoz finish. Perry gets the win. Shibata comes out looking, still okay. And after the match, Perry is threatening to attack Shibata with the TNT Championship. He's interrupted by Daniel Garcia, who I think many of us assumed would probably be where this story was headed. Garcia seemed like the next logical challenger for Perry's TNT Championship, except that Garcia is quickly overshadowed by a returning MJF, who then cuts a promo on Garcia, and then not to be not to be outdone, MJF is then cut off by a returning Adam Cole. So we had three levels of post-match interference here. One from the guy who we expected to be involved, one from the guy who has been gone for a little bit of time, and one from the guy who's been gone for a lot of time. So, Tony, anything you want to talk about with that post match segment, go ahead.
It's like I'm sure it was exciting for the live crowd, but boy, did you just they threw so much into one segment because the logical thing was, Daniel Garcia coming out and challenging and Jack Perry and defending Shibata because they're buddies. That made sense. I was even okay with MJF coming out and because you're like, all right, the last time we saw MJF, Daniel Garcia was embarrassing him after he, after All In. So at that point, I'm even still okay. And then Adam Cole comes out, and you're like, boy, you're really just throwing a bunch of stories and mashing them together into one post match angle at a time. And the funny thing is, everyone wants to see Adam Cole get his hands on MJF. But when this whole thing started, MJF was the babyface and Adam Cole was supposed to be the heel. So we're supposed to forget that, I guess. And like I said, and I'm fans of if I was putting my fan hat on, I love MJF's work. I love Adam Cole's work, but the logic of this is you got to turn your brain off because you got to remember where these guys left off last November. And it's like, so much has happened with both of these guys since then. And what was supposed to be the Undisputed Kingdom is not working. And maybe that's why recently on television, it seems like Roderick Strong has been turning babyface because maybe Cole's going to lead that faction as a babyface. I don't know. It just seemed like, I know they want to get Adam Cole back on TV, but maybe they could have debuted him doing something else and we could have got into this stuff with him and MJF either later this year or early next year. It's not like you got to rush into these things. And it was a lot for one post-match angle, as much as I'm sure the live crowd was excited to see all these guys come back.
It was absolutely a lot, and I wonder if part of the reason to stack the returns on top of each other had something to do with, what we've kind of been talking about, in that they felt like maybe the wrestling was going to be good. The wrestling's always good, but maybe they were under delivering in terms of star power, in terms of big match situations. And so they thought that adding the juice of an Adam Cole return would kind of put them over the top a little bit more. And maybe it did to some people. I'm not sure. I love Adam Cole. Adam Cole is one of my favorite characters, one of my favorite people in wrestling. I have been pretty critical of the way he's been handled in AEW, especially the storyline with the devil. And Tony, you brought up the fact that when this originally took off, we were supposed to be viewing MJF as the babyface and Adam Cole as the heel, and it would be bad enough if that were the case and we were talking about this story for the first time in over a year at this point, but it even was reestablished just a few months ago that Adam Cole is the heel and MJF is the babyface when MJF
Mm-hmm.
comes back and Adam Cole comes back at the same time. They kind of already did the angle
Mm-hmm.
once with reverse roles. And at that point, I thought that they were sending the very clear message that, hey, we are done with this, because the way that MJF unceremoniously just dumped Cole out of the ring when they shot that angle, I thought, okay, this is their admission that this just didn't work. They're moving on.
Mhm.
MJF is a babyface. Adam Cole, maybe Adam Cole comes back as a babyface, but he's going to be off TV for a while regardless. And instead, tonight we get this reignition of a feud that never was.
Mhm.
And I hope that they can make something out of it. I hope that they can make lemonade out of lemons, but I don't know how much attention you want to draw toward what most people consider the lowest point in company history. I'm just not sure how much attention you want to draw to that. I'm also not sure if they even considered that they were, in a way, bigfooting Daniel Garcia, who was supposed to be their big new signing. Garcia, sort of gets his moment with Jack Perry, but then is quickly bigfooted by MJF, and then further bigfooted by the fact that, hey, Adam Cole is a cooler, bigger baby face than you are. I think that that is one that they may want back before all is said and done. But
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah, I totally agree
Anything,
with
yeah.
you. I thought a few months ago that was their way of like saying, all right, we're gonna put this Adam Cole and MJF thing behind us, maybe come back to it someday when when we have a fresh slate and people can kind of forget about this. That's why I kind of said earlier, I was hopeful that I knew Cole would be coming back soon. You knew MJF wasn't going to be gone for too long. And I figured, let's let these guys do their own things for 3 or 4 months, 6 months, whatever. And then if you want to come back around to this and start the feud over, and like it's almost like, all right, we've cleansed our palate of that, and now we can come back to it and do it, do something different. And these guys are going to have great chemistry as long as they don't do the buddy buddy thing again, which everyone hated.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was funny. And even at the end of that segment, Adam Cole goes to give Daniel Garcia a fist bump, and and even I'm thinking what you were just saying. It's almost like, yeah, I just stole all your thunder after Max stole all your thunder. But hey, let me try to make you look good here with the fist bump. And I just kind of, when I saw that, I just went, oh boy, poor Daniel Garcia. This was supposed to be, his big week, and now he's just kind of lost in this shuffle of this post match angle that it was just too much. And they should have brought Cole back and had him do his own thing. But now I don't know. I'm like you said. I hope there's a there's some sort of arc they're going to follow here, and it wasn't just let's just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that they can salvage something out of this. I mean, if Garcia very quickly transitions to a program with Jack Perry and Adam Cole is off doing his own thing, you can it'll be fine. Do I think that there are ways that they could have mitigated or completely eliminated the negative outcome that I think they got tonight? Yeah, absolutely. But like they didn't bury Daniel Garcia by any means. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he can certainly come out of this fine, but I think it just kind of gives you maybe a little bit of insight as to where they see him long term on the
Mm-hmm.
card. And I don't think it's way at the tippy top. I think that there's a definite hierarchy, and Garcia is not at the top of it.
Yeah.
But I also want to give a quick shout out here. Anthony Foster on YouTube saying that he was there live. Everyone was pretty sad and confused after the main event, for sure. And we're gonna talk more about the main event here in a little bit. Anthony, if you want to add anything about your in person perspective, feel free to do so in the chat, and that'd be awesome. We can certainly share it on the show as well. We'll go to match number 4 on the main card now. Will Ospreay defending the AEW International Championship in a three-way match against Konosuke Takeshita and Ricochet. Don Callis came to ringside with Konosuke Takeshita and then joined the commentary table for this match. Tony, what did you think?
The match itself was very good. I mean, if it would have been bad, I think we all would have been shocked and disappointed. The match itself was fine. The finish, I think I would have preferred to see Takeshita win clean, and then maybe they attack Osprey after the match, and then we get the reveal that Fletcher is siding with the Callis family over him. I don't think it kills Takeshita or anything. Think Takeshita is going to be fine. Obviously, his work speaks for itself, and I think for the first time, and I guess this has probably been, I don't know, it feels like a year and a half, 2 years since the Don Callis family has been a thing on AEW television. They actually feel kind of relevant, so that's a good thing. But like I said, I would have liked the finish to be a little different. But overall, like I said, good match. I just think the finish, I would have liked something a little different. But there's different ways they can go with this, and obviously, I think we're getting that Cal Fletcher and Will Ospreay feud now, and that should be great. I just hope they, give these guys, equal time to, tell a good story, because there's a lot of history with those two guys. But the AEW's problem is they don't like to explain the history as much as they should. So hopefully they give these guys time to do that, because it's been mentioned on television by the commentators that, especially during the pandemic, that Will Ospreay was really there for Cal Fletcher, and hopefully they let these guys dive into that and tell that story, and by themselves. And there's no reason that the payoff matches should be excellent, but like I said, I'm optimistic coming out of it. And the Takeshita, for him, this is a long time coming. Hopefully he gets a strong run as the international champion. And I know just from listening to Wade and even Jason Powell, I think we could put to rest now what the second actual biggest title in AEW is. It's got to be the international title, because there's always been some confusion. Is it the AEW? Is it the international title, the TNT title, the Continental title? For me, it's the international title, and I think they cemented that, not maybe tonight, but at least in recent history, that international title is their second biggest title, and you could tell some good stories with it.
Yeah, definitely. Anthony Foster chiming in on YouTube again, saying the triple threat was hot in the building, and there were plenty of cheers for Takeshita. And that was kind of where I was going with my comments on this too. Tony, I agree with you. I thought that the match was really really good. Like you said, it's hard to imagine these three having a bad match. I did think that they did an admirable job making Ricochet not feel like a third wheel. When he sort of did feel like a third wheel on Wednesday, I do think that this issue is much more about Will Ospreay and Don Callis and the Don Callis family than it is Ricochet. And I get why they wanted to tie Ricochet into this thing coming in, because of the storied history with Ospreay. But I do think that I might have liked this even better if Ricochet just wasn't in the match. And I don't even mean that as a knock to Ricochet. He's an incredible athlete, does incredible stuff in the ring, and had incredible spots in this match. I just think that the personal issue between Ospreay and Takeshita and Don Callis outweighed the benefit of having the extra oomph that Ricochet gave the match itself. But for what it was, for what they went out there and did, I thought that it was excellent. Probably I would say probably my second favorite match of the night behind the main event. If we're just talking, pure from a pure wrestling perspective. I thought that this was at the time the strongest match on the show by a pretty significant margin. But I was taken aback by the amount of cheers for Takeshita, not only during the match itself, but more specifically after the win and after the turn from Kyle Fletcher. Because you have Will Ospreay, who is, arguably the number one babyface in the company. You could certainly make the case that, maybe he's 1B behind Brian Danielson right now, and I wouldn't argue that, or even 2 behind Danielson. That's fine. But in any case, you're building the company largely around Will Ospreay, and he's just been turned on by one of his closest friends and by a heel faction, and Don Callis, who is one of the only characters in AEW who manages to get consistent heat. And the crowd isn't booing this moment with Callis and Fletcher. they're preoccupied by cheering a title win for Takeshita, which to me took away from the seriousness and the gravitas of this Callus feud, and what they were trying to accomplish with Fletcher. So it spoke to, I think, what is a larger issue with story investment. And a lot of people will get on AEW for not telling stories, and I've never thought that that has been their problem. I've always thought that the problem was more allowing the audience to treat the product like it's just a fun show. And hey, we just love great wrestling and we're all in on it. We know Takeshita's not really a bad guy and we love him. So we're going to cheer him. And I think that that takes away from the overall product. I think that a company is much stronger and a story is much stronger when you have people very clearly invested in a babyface and a heel. And you saw that in the main event. John Moxley was a nasty heel. Brian Danielson was an over the top, babyface working from behind. And you had this incredible electric atmosphere that felt like a real give and take and push and pull instead of rah rah, this is awesome. We're gonna pop for everything these guys do because they're cool moves.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I agree with you. That's it's kind of funny that you said that. It's not that AEW doesn't tell stories. You're right. They do tell stories. It's a matter of the depth that they put into those stories because they'll tell a lot of stories or they'll rush some stories like we talked about how there was some really quick builds for this card that if they'd had a couple more weeks to really put some time and some thought into giving the story some more depth and explaining things better and letting these guys go out and tell that story, I think the card would have come off much better, and I think the crowd would have been a lot more invested. And I think your word investment is speaks volumes. It's like the Mark Briscoe. It's the word of the night, investment. So yeah, I mean, to your point, I think the crowd was just happy that it's like, all right, finally they're doing something with Takeshita. But again,
Sure.
I don't want to, you can tell by my shirt, I'm also a huge Marvel fan, and it's not like I came out of the Infinity War going, oh my God, man, Thanos, it was about time they did something good with Thanos. Like I was crushed because I was invested in these characters that all of a sudden were gone. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I apologize. But Thanos is the big villain, and at the end of the Infinity War, he won, and everyone left the theater despondent. At least when I was there, and I was, my wife took a picture of me after she came out of the restroom, and she made a meme out of it. And I had my sunglasses on, and I was just sitting there dejected. And I'm sure Sean Radican's laughing somewhere when he watches this. But it's not like, if you're really invested, you're not going, man, I'm glad they finally did something with that guy. You're like, if he's the baby face, you're sure that's fine. You're thrilled. But if he's the heel, you want to be pissed off that this guy won and how he was able to, win that title. And that didn't happen. So, I mean, I don't think it's a death knell by any point for any point for Takeshita, but yeah, I think there's something to be said for the fact that they just need to focus more on getting people to invest in these stories rather than matches and matches and matches.
For sure. Speaking of characters that the audience is typically invested in, we had a brief backstage segment with Renee Paquette. She, for some reason, it was tossed to her, and Orange Cassidy was standing with Jerry Lynn. Wasn't explained as to why this was happening on television, but it did. Jerry Lynn gives Orange Cassidy a pep talk, says basically he can be the guy if he wants to be the guy. Hook walks into frame. He agrees. What'd you make of this?
I It felt like a random segment you would see on Rampage or Collision. I
Yeah,
didn't. I mean, I didn't think it was a bad segment. I just didn't understand its placement. And again, it felt like it. I mean, you could have put it on Dynamite too, but it just felt like such a random segment to throw into the middle of a pay-per-view. And I don't know if that was supposed to explain why he came out at the end of the night too, but then again, so did Private Party. And maybe it's
yeah,
like a shift that these guys are going to start taking things more serious. And I know we're going to talk about Private Party coming up in the future in a few minutes here, but maybe that's the thing is that I know you never cared, but if you really did, you could be a bigger star than you already are. I mean, it was just weird placement. I was fine with it, but I didn't understand.
Yeah, I definitely agree. BJF in the chat said as well, it was odd, seemed like a Rampage segment,
Yeah.
echoing your sentiments, Tony. If nothing else, I thought that content aside, I appreciated the fact that they did something other than very quick post-match celebration. Tony throws to a or Excalibur throws to a video package for the next match. I mean, just giving me something to break up that monotony, I thought was good. But if it leads to something cool, but like Jerry Lynn is not an on-screen character, so why just all of a sudden are you placing him on television with words for Orange Cassidy? It felt a little out of left field. But we'll see where it goes for Orange Cassidy. Segment after that, we had Prince Nana in the ring, awaiting the return of Swerve Strickland. Swerve comes out. He cuts, a promo for the hometown crowd. Out comes MVP and Shelton Benjamin. There's a little bit of back and forth. Swerve is kind of talking about the pros and cons of staying with Prince Nana versus joining MVP and Shelton. And ultimately, he chooses to stick with Prince Nana. There's some a heated exchange between he and Shelton Benjamin, and we assume that either he's going to face Shelton soon, or we can surmise that someone else is coming in. Tony, any particular thoughts on this? And what side did you want Swerve to end up on?
It's funny. I'm glad you asked that question. Like in a perfect world, I would have rather seen Swerve end up with MVP, but you also knew he wasn't going to turn heel in front of his his home crowd. So,
Yeah.
so don't be surprised if by like January this does happen. Um, but having said that, we already talked about MJF and Adam Cole coming back. I'd have been really happy if one of those two, if not both, didn't come back and we got Bobby Lashley tonight. That it would have made more sense at least. Um, but I was fine with the segment overall. You knew, like I said, I knew he wasn't going to turn on Prince Nana in his hometown and turn heel in his hometown. But I'm looking to see where they go with this. But at the same time, you got to think. I mean, I guess they could do it as a 2-on-1 or 3-on-1 type thing. It would probably be two. Uh, if it's going to be Shelton and presumably Bobby Lashley that's coming in, is Swerve going to have to get with Prince Nana and start a tag team or a faction of his own? He's already basically he had one earlier. What was it? What was it called? I can't remember now. The
Um,
oh my
yeah, I'm drawing a
goodness.
blank too.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank for it's the old ROH faction. But anyways, he had it with Prince Nana, and it was basically terrible. And then they dropped it, and it. So I don't know if they're going to reform some sort of faction with Prince Nana, but we'll see what happens with that. I just feel like something's going to have to happen with that as well.
In our defense, was a 4-hour pay-per-view, and it is 1 a.m. on the East Coast, so
Yeah, it's why. Yeah,
I'll give us both a pass.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought that this was fine for what it was. To me, Swerve has his ups and downs in promos. I think sometimes he loses the plot a little bit, sort of mixes his words. There have been times where I thought he's been really clear and concise, and others where it just seems like he's kind of meandering through or to get to his point. Thought there was a little bit of that tonight, but for the most part, it worked. The humor with Prince Nana was good. I liked him bringing up the history that he has with MVP and giving a really strong shout out to Shelton Benjamin. I thought that was a nice touch. Benjamin certainly very an underappreciated wrestler in the grand scheme of things, and I'm curious to see what he does in AEW. Seems like obviously that this does, like you said, as others have inferred, that this leads to Bobby Lashley at some point. So we'll see. It's a good sidebar for Swerve. I think it's a good way to give him something to sink his teeth into and have him be involved in a major program while not in the AEW World Title picture. So net positive overall. I think that could they have shaved a few minutes off of this to save some time on the pay per view overall? Sure, but that's never been the name of the game with AEW. They like their 4-hour pay-per-views, man. No matter what, you gotta get the 4-hour pay-per-view in. That is going to bring us to the fifth match on the card, and this is where I sort of draw the line in the sand, where I thought things started to take a turn downhill in terms of participation, involvement, investment, and just overall show quality. It was Hologram versus the Beast Mortos, a 2 out of 3 falls match. This is a follow up to their feud that has largely been taking place on Rampage and Collision. And boy, did it feel like it, because these two got no reaction when they came out. It was as if a lot of the people in the building were seeing them for the first time. And it is very possible that they were, because people don't watch Rampage and Collision. As unfortunate as it is to say, I thought the match was good. I mean, like you kind of expect. It's an AEW pay per view. The wrestling is going to be good. Hologram did some really cool stuff. Mortos was certainly game for everything that Hologram threw at him, and he's an impressive athlete and competitor for his size. But this just died a slow death out there because of the reaction from the crowd. PJ Hendry here in the chat saying he was in the arena and the hologram match sucked the life out of the place, and that's what it felt like on TV too. It felt like it could have easily been saved for Dynamite or Collision or Rampage, and move the pace of the show on a little bit quicker. I think I understand what the purpose of getting this on pay-per-view was. They had the shout out before the match to Fox Sports and how they're a new Spanish partner, and so they wanted to get that in there. But man, at 16 minutes, as a total crowd killer, I just thought that they've got to be a little better at editing. Tony.
Well, PJ, thank you for the comment. I'll tell you this. I mean, as you could tell, I was not in the arena, but if I were, I would do what I did here, and that was my bathroom break slash I'm gonna go make some popcorn. and I'm not kidding. I went upstairs and then I missed the first half of the match because I made popcorn and used the restroom. So it's a shame because both those guys are really talented. Mortos, especially for his size, he works like a cruiserweight, but he has a phenomenal size. They're both great workers, and you could tell by the end the crowd did get into the match just because the match itself was well worked. But like I said, I obviously, if you watch enough of AEW television, you know who those guys are. But if you don't, and you're like the majority of the audience that watches just Dynamite and occasionally will peek in on Collision or Rampage, you really don't know much about Mortos or Hologram, as you said, Brandon. So, like I said, I felt bad for them because I feel like they were almost set up for failure. They're not pushed well on television, and then they were thrown out in front of a 8,000 people, and in front of 8,000 people, and nobody knew what to think of the two guys. And they put on a great match for the time they were given, but did anybody really care at the end? I don't think so.
Yeah, it's just really hard on a card on a pay per view where again I go back to WWE can get away with sort of lower profile matches on PLEs because they're essentially free. They're an extension of the television now. You're paying maybe $5, $10 for Peacock. If you've got certain cable providers, you might even get it for free. So you're not really paying anything for these shows. AEW is charging a premium. They're going to continue charging a premium. It sounds like next year when they debut on Max that there's going to be a discount stateside, but even with that discount, it's likely to still be a pretty significant commitment. And I don't like the idea of throwing just a match for the sake of having a good match on a pay-per-view that you're paying that much money for. It reminded me a lot of sort of the doldrum era of WWE where they would just throw they wouldn't announce it in advance, but they would just throw a match that they did like 3 times on the past week's Raw
Mhm.
and SmackDown as a filler match on the pay-per-view because they needed to fill time and they hadn't booked enough. And it would just get guys on the card and it would get them out there as a break in between 2 of the bigger matches. And I just don't I've never liked that booking strategy. I think it drags the overall quality of the show down. Even if the match is good, I just don't think that the investment is there. Again, word of the night, investment. Uh, I just don't think that the investment is there that warrants putting them out there, especially for that length of time. They gave them 16 minutes. I realize it was a 2 out of 3 falls match, but still. So, I mean, yeah, like we both kind of said, good match, well worked. You know, both of those guys could have a great future, but probably would have been best being left off of this show. Um, Going on to match number 6 now, we had a grudge match between Darby Allin and Brody King. Darby received a cool entrance video with some special music. He rode to the arena on a skateboard, and they showed him, you know, arriving at the Tacoma Dome, coming off the back of trailing a bus on a skateboard. So cool little intro video there for Darby Allin. Tony, how'd you feel about the match?
Match was good. I again, I should just have a button I could push. I wish the story had more substance to it and got to play out. I wish they would. It was so much. It was basically a week and a half story that started with an open challenge, and for
Mhm.
there quote unquote being so much history between these guys that happened on the indies, and most of us, and as much as much wrestling as I watch, I was not real big into the northwestern United States indie scene. So tell me about this story. Give me more than just one promo on Dynamite the week of the show. So, but otherwise, Darby needed a big win on pay per view because if you're to believe some of the rumors, presumably he was originally going to be the guy to beat Danielson at this pay per view, and but this story with Mox and Danielson in Brian's career, quote unquote, ending, definitely took more of an important stake in the company. So, but I like the match. Like to see Darby going over, but at the same time, this roster is so deep. It's a shame to see someone like Brody King not getting more, more TV time. And the biggest thing he's done was last year's Continental Classic, and they have something with him. And I don't know if they're ever going to use him properly, or I hate to even bring it up because it's a completely different topic that would need another show. But I mean, if AEW, if their roster was full and healthy for any prolonged amount of time, they could easily do a roster split and try to make Collision feel more important. But
Mhm.
that's, like I said, another story for another time. But overall, good match, enjoyable match. And Darby did the regular things that, every now and then he has to just find ways to beat himself up, and they find new ways to do it every time he's in a big match. So
Yeah, I liked a lot of the visuals in this match. I mean, the size disparity between the two. I mean, right as the bell rang, Brody King just like haphazardly throws Darby out of the ring like a rag doll. I thought that was a good little moment. Brody's a really good talent, and I have seen him, you know, before he joined the ranks of AEW. I saw him wrestle a couple of times for a local promotion, and he really has that star presence. And I think that they definitely could get something more out of him than they have. It seemed like a foregone conclusion here going in that Darby was going to get the win. They sold pretty hard from the get go that Darby had never pinned Brody King, so it seemed like they were setting that up for the eventual finish. But it was certainly a good match. I mean, I thought that they told a compelling story within the confines of what they were trying to do. The multiple German suplexes to Darby Allin, setting up the German suplex off of the ring post and the turnbuckles to the outside onto the steps that had been propped there earlier in the match, and of course it fails. Darby shoves Brody King. He collides with the side of the steps, and then that leads to the finish with Darby hitting not one but two coffin drops, one onto King on the steps, and then another as King is sliding in the ring to break the referee's 10 count. I thought it was a creative sequence and a really creative finish there. I like the fact that Darby was able to do some Darby-esque stuff without it getting overly violent, and they were able to do it creatively within the structure of like a 12-minute match, which is not something that you saw a couple of months ago. Was it? It might have been an All In. Was it Darby and Jack Perry? That just felt like it got really, really rushed. A bunch of spots just didn't land particularly well. It just didn't work. The flow wasn't there. And for something that was placed in a similar position on the card and of similar importance, I thought they did a really, really good job with the time that they had allotted for this. So not much to say in terms of where this puts Darby long term, but I thought it was a good win, a good match, and I do hope that we see a little bit more from Brody King in the future. I don't know what the current situation is with the House of Black. I'm a fan of that group, but I'm not a fan of the way that they sort of exist in their own universe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, between House of Black and FTR, they're basically on Collision, and that's the only time you see
Mhm.
them, and that's only if you're watching Collision. Um, and then you could also say the same about um, Starks as well, but that's a whole nother. Like I said, you could do a whole show just about guys that you don't see on AEW. AEW, I'll call it AEW proper, which is basically just Dynamite in the pay-per-views.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a shame because Malachi Black, I think, is a heck of a talent. Brody King and Buddy Matthews, all those guys. It's a shame that, like I said, they have a plethora of talent that just they don't get used properly. And there's guys that disappear for months at a time. And I don't know. It's like I said, another topic for another show at another time. But I would like to see all those guys utilized more. But and would really help that viewership of that show, but I also don't like the time slot. Like I said, a lot of different topics we could talk about at another time. I just that collision spot I think it's just a terrible time spot, but especially 4 to 5 months of the year when you're going up against college football and different things of that sort.
Yeah, I think it's compelling and interesting too that like we're talking about all of these guys that we feel are underutilized, and this was a show in particular that really could have benefited from
Mhm.
having some of those guys with more star power. I mean, we just finished talking, about the Beast Mortos and Hologram, and not to say that they can't be stars in their own right in the future, but they're not right now. And this next match that we're going to talk about, the AEW World Tag Team Title match, the Young Bucks and Private Party, I mean, they're trying to do some things with Private Party. It doesn't seem to be landing all that well. And there are other teams that, are sort of sitting off to the side, waiting in the wings. Some of them have been in this spotlight before and wrestled the Young Bucks before. And so you don't want to go back to that well too many times. But there are other teams, like, for example, the House of Black, whatever iteration you want to pick of the House of Black, who in a position to potentially be baby faces at some point down the line could be a team that would match up well against the Young Bucks. I don't know what it takes to ensure that certain talent gets consistent pushes, but we've seen this time and time again with AEW where there are a number of guys, be it, Ricky Starks when he was featured, Daniel Garcia, House of Black, the list goes on. Guys who will be heavily and prominently featured on television for 2, maybe 3 weeks, and then they will disappear for months on end to the point that you almost forget they're under contract. That's been a long-standing issue that this company has, and I think tonight you sort of saw the fruits of that bore out, where you had a lot of acts who they were trying to feature, who they were trying to grow interest in, and they're just none of them are there yet. And whether it's the fact that they pulled the trigger too early on these pay-per-view matches, or they just picked the wrong guys to put in these spots, I'm not sure. Tony, do you have any, you know, one way or another?
Yeah, I mean, you already talked. You said we were going to get into the next match, and you talk about Private Party, and this is especially the one where it's like there was seeds of a story that didn't get a chance to grow. At the beginning of the year, they talked about, man, this is the year we need to win the AEW tag team titles, and then you largely don't see them unless you're watching Collision or mostly, I
Mhm.
think, for them, Rampage for the much of the year, and then 10 days before, 10 to 14 days before, a pay-per-view, they state that they're going after the Young Bucks for the tag team titles. And it's like, man, if you knew you were going to do this, start getting these guys, even if you're just going to do it as a short-term thing, which you can still do and pull off properly. Start giving them wins at the end of July into September. Start getting them on a run and go, man, Private Party, they've been really hot lately. They're really picking up steam towards the end of the year. And then start having them talk about the promo they talked at the beginning of the year. And they said, time's running out. We're already into the last quarter of the year. We said we were going to win the tag team titles. Show them wrestling with a purpose, a sense of urgency. And that story I think could have been, it was there tonight, but it was so rushed that you didn't believe that they were really going to win because there was no story behind it. And, the Young Bucks are now playing the EVP, and we're going to show everyone who still runs this place, which they've been doing for months, in fairness. But the Private Party part of it, it's just, man, if you knew this is where you were going to go a few months ago, and my guess is they didn't, you really could have had a good story here, but instead you rushed it into a tight 2-week window, and what you saw is what you got. And Private Party, they worked a hell of a match tonight. They really did with the Young Bucks, and the crowd did get behind them. But at the same time, I can't believe that anybody really thought they were going to see a title change. And at the same time, is that video package with Amazing Red, it kind of came out of nowhere because the story wasn't told
Mhm.
properly.
Yeah, the Amazing Red Spot definitely came out of nowhere. I mean, and then to have Shivani talking about it, and Excalibur afterward, it almost felt like it caught them off guard,
Hmm.
which was kind of
Yeah.
funny. Anthony Foster in the chat just saying really quiet match for the Bucks, and yeah, I mean the crowd just wasn't invested. Again, it all comes down to that, and BJF pointed out as well that a lot of people like Private Party, but there was never a moment where you really felt like the Bucks' reign was in jeopardy. I mean, you never felt like, even for all the near falls, it just felt like this was a foregone conclusion. That
Hmm.
this was a filler feud for the Bucks until they move on to whatever is next for them. And yeah, Private Party are a fine challenger, but ultimately, this felt like a match that should have been built for a Dynamite and not for a pay-per-view, unless you were able to get Private Party to a better place before pulling the trigger on this. I thought that, you know, Private Party worked, like you said, Tony, a hell of a match. I mean, they worked incredibly hard. The Bucks did their thing. This was good. Like most of the stuff on this show, it was good, but it just didn't land. And you wound up just feeling bad for Private Party in the end because, AEW has this issue I bring up a lot where they very frequently won't let moments breathe after something happens. they will just cut away to the next match as quickly as possible because they're trying to get to the next thing and they've got to, get everything in time. They don't let the moment linger. And yet here, the one moment where they decide to let
Yep.
things linger,
Yep.
it's Quen and Zay in the ring, and they're trying to sell the effects of coming up just short and not being able to win the tag team titles. And the crowd is just kind of sitting there in
Hmm.
silence. And
Yep.
then there's like a sympathy chant for Private
Right.
Party. And I'm thinking, oh man, like
Yeah.
I almost would rather it be quiet
Right.
than you get that like weak
Yeah.
sympathy chant.
One
Like
section of the
it's like
arena. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's like the crowd had this moment where they just suddenly realized, like, "Oh man, this looks pretty bad for the baby faces.
Hmm.
We gotta at least put in a little effort here." So yeah, I just thought that after the after match sort of summed up a lot of the issues that they had in the middle portion of this show, just having it feel like an extended commercial free episode of Dynamite. And I don't think that that's something that that's not an issue that you want to run into on a $50 pay-per-view.
No, and it's like you read my mind because I was going to touch on that too. Like they did the post match spot where they cut the music of the young bucks after they won and then exited, went through
Mhm.
the ramp, and then there's this silence, and like you said, it was like one section. It just starts chanting "Private Party," and you're like, it was almost cringe. Like, oh man, these poor guys, but again, that's the booking issue. It's not anything Private Party did. It's just the position they were put in, and they did. I guess we both agree they had a hell of a match, but the story was underwhelming because they waited too late to tell it, and it didn't have any impact.
Yeah. So we've reached the final two matches of the night. This was the part of the show where Jim Ross joined the commentary table, and boy was he ornery already when he got to the table. Uh, I feel like I'm a lot like JR when I'm watching these shows, and I realize like we're getting to the end, and it's like, man, like are we really not at the main event yet? And especially one like this where I felt like the middle of the show kind of dragged.
I forgot this
So
match was coming too.
I
I
did
really
too.
was like,
I did
oh, good,
too.
it's time for the main event, and then I went, oh, that's right.
No, got to get Jericho in there.
Yeah.
You can only take one pay per view off from Chris Jericho. Those are the rules. So eighth match on the card, Ring of Honor World Championship match. Mark Briscoe defends against Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho has Big Bill at his side. Brian Keith not coming to the ring with Jericho, but did get involved in the match itself. This one went 15 minutes, just over 15 minutes. Mark Briscoe retains with a J Driller coming out of a Froggy Bow. And you know, big story in this one. Jericho hits the Judas effect late and gives Mark Briscoe the J Driller. Jay kicks out, or Mark kicks out of it, and kind of goes into a no sell mode where he starts kind of hulking up and no selling Jericho's punches, and then that leads into the finish. I thought this was fine. It's a 2024 Jericho match. They kind of threw the Ring of Honor rules out the window. Excalibur kind of had to do the whole thing where he's like, it's almost a fight without honor, and JR is kind of like a little pissy from the start. He mixes up Mark and Jay's name. Excalibur has to correct him. JR apologizes. It's a whole thing. Brian Keith gets involved in the middle there. They do a table spot on the outside from a table that Big Bill set up earlier in the match. Again, I just this didn't feel like it needed to be on this show. I generally I am. If you gave me a vote, I would say let's not defend ROH titles on AEW pay per views, please and thank you. And that's where I would, that would be my say on the matter. Tony, am I being too critical of Chris Jericho and Mark Briscoe?
So, first thing, I've been on record too. I agree that keep ROH titles off AEW television. I don't mind if the talent shows up. I mean, they all work for Tony Khan. He could use the talent as he
Mhm.
wants. That's fine. Second thing, I'm also one of the, and I'm not going to call myself an apologist, but I will say I am amongst the Pro Wrestling Torch and even ProWrestling.net family. I like to call it one big group. I'm a little bit more forgiving of this Jericho gimmick, and I'm not saying it's great, but I still get some entertainment value out of it.
Mhm.
I didn't hate this match. I thought the match was actually pretty good. That doesn't mean it belonged on the pay-per-view. Another thing I've been on record, and you've actually touched on this a little bit ago, you know, these pay-per-views, they're just 4 hours long and then they drag and drag and drag. If what was there? You said there were 9 matches tonight. If they would have gone somewhere between 7 and 8, even though it's only 1 to 2 matches, boy, that goes a long way. And you
Yeah.
put some of these matches on the Dynamite, either leading into or coming out of the pay-per-view. And it's something that WWE's done recently with SmackDown. And
Mhm.
I love that they do that. It makes sense. They put a big match on the night before a pay-per-view on SmackDown, and it feels like a big deal. AEW should be doing the same thing on either Collision or Dynamite, leading into pay-per-views or coming out of pay-per-views. And boy, I think this would have been a great one to have in that type of spot. You know, even though I don't want a Ring of Honor titles defended on AEW television, period, either. But if you're going to do that, I had no problem with the match. I thought both guys worked really well. For Jericho's age, I still give him credit. He works really well for someone that's 54 years old or whatever he is. I liked the match, but again, I can't, I have to agree with you that it just didn't have a spot on the pay-per-view. And I forgot it was on the pay-per-view because we got to that point and I'm like, all right, I'm ready for Danielson and Mox. And oh yeah, we got to sit through this. And then it's not like it was bad, but I could have done without it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I didn't think that the match was bad by any stretch, and I think that actually, if I'm to think of recent big Jericho matches, I'd probably put it on the higher end. It's just to me something like I'm not look. Chris Jericho was once my favorite wrestler. I mean, just full
Same.
on for years. He was my favorite. And I have grown tired of most of the shtick. I think there are some redeeming elements to the Learning Tree character, and I think there's a place for it and him on the roster at this point. And I do think that they're doing a better job positioning him. Um, there's no Jericho has no business being in a main event position at this stage of his career with the talent that's on the AEW roster. But I think that he can still contribute in some way. And this was a fine contribution. I just think on a show that's already, bloated, and given that it's an ROH title defense, it would have been better served off the show. Though Sai T in the chat does bring up a good point, saying they needed a feel good win given what was to follow, and I do think that that is a good point. There was, a number of finishes that weren't exactly crowd pleasing. We talked earlier, Jack Perry and Shibata having that kind of schmoz finish. And then you do the Bucks going over Private Party with kind of a whimper. You have Hologram and Mortos, which the crowd isn't particularly invested in. Like Darby getting a win is fun, but it doesn't feel like anything significant or unpredictable. So I agree in that respect, especially for its place on the card. I think that it made sense to have Briscoe get a win in the semi-main here before going to our final match of the night, Brian Danielson, John Moxley for the AEW World Championship. We've already talked about the aftermath of this, and we can touch on it again if there's anything that you want to add, Tony, or anyone in the chat wants to add. But go ahead and just talk about the match itself and the title change here.
I mean, the match itself, I think it was everything you thought you were going to get from Danielson and Moxley. They did some stuff outside the ring that was hard hitting. They did some stuff inside the ring that was hard hitting. They did a little bit of technical stuff, and you feel like it's just Mox saying to Danielson, "Hey, let's do the greatest hits, as best we can here. If we're gonna go out, I'm gonna, show let you do a little bit of everything that you do really well in this final match, quote unquote final match, because I don't believe it's a final match, but you know, those guys are always going to have good matches when they work together. There's a respect level there, and they're going to make each other look good. And it did, and it was a good match. Part of me would have liked to have seen Danielson tap out. I don't know that it really changes anything, but just a personal preference. But no, in terms of the match and the basic finish, I was fine with it, and I liked the immediate aftermath where Moxley is selling the story well. That even though he won, he didn't celebrate really. He just kind of sat there and looked at Danielson. He did want his hand raised as the winner, but I did like I said, it's a good hook. The Moxley's reaction to winning that title, I am intrigued about where it's going.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Moxley's reaction after the match, I thought said a lot about what they're trying to do here, the message they're trying to send about his position, his position as a character going forward. I think that was a strong move for sure. And then as far as the match itself, I really enjoyed it. I thought that this was probably my favorite of the night overall. I mean, if you want to talk about just pure, AEW style, all out action, you probably give the nod to the three-way earlier in the night. But as far as the style of wrestling that I enjoy, that I look for, especially at a main event level, I think this one probably took the cake for me as far as being my favorite. I I I liked the pre-match brawl. I thought that they set the stage and set the table for themselves really nicely by just coming out of the gates really hot. And I'll put up here, BJF in the chat said, "Love Final Countdown playing before the bell shenanigans. Some good timing to end the song in the match as the in-ring match started." I agree. I think that I'm a little less positive on the theme song playing out the way that it does, only because I think that they've kind of overused the spot a little bit. They've done it in most of the Anarchy in the Arena
Mhm.
matches. This one was a little bit different, but like everyone understands and knows that there's a guy, at the control panel with a button that fades out the music, stops the music, whatever. What cue is he waiting for? Because the bell, like I get that the music faded out when the bell rang, but
Mhm.
that's not typically when the music fades out. Like it fades out before the bell rings and you get in-ring introductions and the whole 9 yards. So it felt a little telegraphed to me. I would have preferred if they found a more natural stopping point. Totally cool with it extending beyond, the first minute or so of the brawl. And I get why they love the chaos of the whole thing, but I would just like it to be a little bit more of a natural stopping point than like, oh, I'm gonna hold it until that bell rings. But small critique aside, I really thought that the opening brawl was a lot of fun. I thought that they did a really nice job with it, and the bulk of the match was really strong. I liked, the back and forth work. I liked that they hammered on Brian's neck injury, but they didn't cross the line into a territory where I felt uncomfortable. It felt like it was happening within the confines of the match and that it was safe. And I think that's a huge thing that I want to see out of AEW when it comes to the handling of Brian Danielson. So all positives there. I'm with you, Tony. I would have preferred a tap out just because, again, like the final countdown thing with the music not shutting off, I think the pass out finish is overdone. Not just in AEW, but in wrestling in general. WWE has overused this finish as well. I get why they do it. I understand that it protects the babyface or the heel if it's the other way around. I just think that it's something that there should be a moratorium on for a little bit of time. PJ
Yeah.
Hendry in the chat saying the song added amazing energy in the building, which for sure. I mean,
Mhm,
like I said, I liked it. I'm a stickler for the logic side of it.
mhm.
Sorry, Tony, go ahead.
No, it's all right. I was gonna say, having said that, even though I would have preferred, you and I both would have preferred the tap out, I did appreciate Bryce Rumsberg's reaction when he called for the bell. It was almost like, "Oh my
Mhm.
god, I just had to call the bell for the
Yeah,
bell in what his
yeah,
quote unquote final full time match." So I did appreciate Rumsberg's reaction to that. Um, so that like I said, that was good. And we're going to get into the post match, and I'll just, in case somebody missed us off the top, maybe I'm weird. The plastic bag thing does not affect me the way it does others. I'm okay with it. I can understand the people that aren't. If maybe it's just one of those things where I'm not as sensitive about it, but it doesn't mean, like, again, doesn't mean if somebody else doesn't like it, that's fine. I did like the JR line when the rest of the locker room did come out and he goes, "Where have you guys been?" Because I was thinking the same thing. Like,
yeah,
sure, Darby
yeah.
and Jeff Jarrett come out, and it's like, that's great and all, but if there's really enough guys back there that love Brian Danielson, it should have been more than two of them running out. And then it took, Darby getting taped to the ropes and Jeff Jarrett finally getting taken out for what, Private Party and Orange Cassidy and maybe someone else to come out. So I did appreciate the logic from Jim Ross on that, even though he was, like you said, cranky old JR for most of the night. That I did appreciate that the line there about, "Where have you guys been?"
Yeah, definitely. Site in the chat, and I definitely understand, wanting to word this carefully, and totally something that we can discuss with nuance, but don't feel bad about bringing it up. After seeing the Owen doc, or the Owen stuff on the Vince McMahon doc, the commentators mirrored Lawler exactly, and I have to hope that was a coincidence. I assume that it was. I don't think that they were trying to channel anything like that, but I do think that there is a really fine line that you have to walk with these things, because there have been actual tragedies in the ring that commentators have had to parse their way through on live television. And Tony, we started the show talking about the closing angle, and we were both kind of on the fence about Excalibur, tearing up. Um, I I I commend him for being able to pull that emotion out on command,
Mhm,
an angle that he knows is a work. But I also I also just wonder if it's worth making. And I don't know, maybe there isn't a single person out there who questioned whether or not maybe something actually did happen when they heard Excalibur choke up. But I don't know if it's worth the risk of that. I don't know that you want to send that message one way or the other.
mhm,
And it's hypocritical of me in a way, because I by the same token, I understand that I also say that I want there to be personal stories, and I want to be invested, and I want there to be clearly defined good guys and bad guys, and the bad guys need to do bad things, and put the baby faces in these perilous positions. And you want your commentary to sell it to a certain extent, but you also don't want to, uh, you know, conjure up memories of a real tragedy,
mhm.
like Owen Hart. Anything you want to throw out there regarding that?
Yeah, the more I've had time to think about it, I agree with you. I can appreciate the fact that he was able to conjure up the emotion and do that. But if I'll tell you what, if Danielson had lost, tapped out, and that was the end of his career, and you just leave him in the middle of the ring, you know, basically him sitting there knowing his career was over, I can understand the emotion, because it's almost like we're seeing the end of his career and it's sad, and I don't want him to retire. I would have almost appreciated it more though if it would have been more of an outrage of, what's the word I'm looking for? If it was more of like a, not an angry outrage, but like one of these, like, you know, what is the end game here? What are we doing? And it's like a desperation plea, like, why is this
Mhm.
happening again? I think I would have rather seen an outrage like that rather than the tears, because I mean, I know you're seeing the end of someone's full-time career, but considering what Moxley did after, I think I would have rather seen an outrage of like, where does it stop type thing, instead of, I don't know. I think maybe the emotion was a little bit misplaced, I guess is what I'm getting at. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does, and I think too, there's something to be said for the fact that I almost feel like they they felt like it was necessary to pivot from the sadness surrounding the end of his full-time in-ring career, because they are internally acknowledging how wordy and convoluted that is.
Hmm.
Because they have to know that, like, hey, we can't say that you just saw Brian Danielson get retired, because he's going to wrestle again, and he's not just going to wrestle again, he's going to wrestle again for us.
Hmm.
And hey, by the way, we're not sure when he's going to do that, but we also know that it's definitely going to happen, and we don't know how many times it's going to happen, so we have to be really careful with our language.
Hmm.
So instead of putting their announcers in a situation where they have to go off the air saying, "Oh, gosh darn it, we just witnessed the end of Brian Danielson's full-time career," which just doesn't resonate. It doesn't
Hmm.
have an emotional impact. Instead, they get to go off the air in silence because of this dastardly act where, hey, not only is Brian Danielson's full-time in-ring career over, his career might be over, and his quality of life
Hmm.
might be
Yeah.
down the drain. Like, I think that there was an element of that, sort of getting them out of that awkward position, because you could see on Dynamite in the last couple of weeks that they've kind of been fumbling with
Hmm.
the words a little bit,
Yep.
trying to figure out exactly how to frame it. So I do wonder if part of it was some of that too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it did come up a few times. It was the quality of life,
Mhm.
argument at the end that, I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, after having more time to think about it, I don't know that the tears would have been the way to go. But again, I'm not. I don't. I didn't hate it, but I thought it was a little strange.
What do you make of the Wheeler Yuta turn after so much hemming and hawing, and them sort of going pretty hard in the last couple of weeks to make you think that he was going to remain aligned with Brian? Did you like that they went that hard and then did the full swerve, or did it feel more like, hey, we're doing the AEW swerve for the sake of swerve thing?
You know what? I didn't mind it because I still think it's playing into the overall story where Wheeler was always on board, but he needed to pick the right time and place, because there's something to it. Because even Moxley is saying, this isn't what he wanted to do, and he had prayed that Danielson wouldn't be the champion when time came for
Mhm.
whatever that is they were supposed to do. So obviously the other members of the BCC, they're they're being given some sort of task by someone, whether it's for money or whether it's for whatever. We're going to find out. I'm fine with it. I'm not that upset with it. Wheeler has a personal connection to Danielson, but for whatever reason, there's something bigger than him that there's a reason for this. So I'm waiting to see what that is. And I'm just hoping it doesn't go off like a fart in church and it's something you're like, oh my God, this was it. I'm really hoping the payoff at the end is worth it. But at this point, I have no reason to crap on it until we get that outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What do you make of we talked a little bit about it to start the show, but what do you make of Moxley throwing the title in the duffel bag? We kind of surmised that we thought there might be some higher power at play here. Do you have any sort of inclination, thought, prediction, who you might think be involved, where this is headed?
I mean, the only one that pops in my head is the obvious one, and at least to me, it's an obvious one, and it has to do with the Shane McMahon thing. I mean, if he's turning over the title to Shane McMahon and Shane can show up on television and go, look, a McMahon's holding the AEW title. I mean, I don't know if that's going to be the perfect payoff, like that I'm talking about. Again, I would also like want to see how it's done. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it with that, but I can't think of anyone else unless it's a really highly guarded secret that they would be turning that over to. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I hadn't put a ton of thought into it, because it feels like they're still in the fairly early stages of trying to suss out where they might be headed. But now that the title is back on Moxley, they're gonna have to start doing some exposition, like, pretty quickly here,
Mhm.
given that he's going to be the focal point and Brian is presumably going to be out of the picture for a little while. I mean, as far as a big splash, yeah, I think you're right. I don't know that you could get much bigger or more interesting on the surface than a Shane McMahon. I also like. I thought that there might be substance to the Shane McMahon rumor, and then weirdly enough, when I saw him pose for that picture with the Young Bucks, and maybe it's a total red herring, but that was kind of when I was like, yeah, okay, they're not doing this.
Mhm.
Like, I thought it was a little too on the nose, like the fact that they would pose for a picture together. I don't know. The alarm bells went off in my head, and I was like, all right, this isn't happening. They're not like Shane wouldn't pose for a picture with the Young Bucks if he was on his way in. But maybe. I mean, I think you're right. I don't think that there's a bigger initial shock. I can't imagine there being any wrestler out there who could Bigfoot Moxley and
Mm-mm.
be, the one pulling the strings. And I also don't like I don't think that's a good story to tell. Moxley's very much an alpha.
Right.
So you don't want him being subservient to another wrestler. So yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm intrigued, which is good. Like they have me on the hook for it. Which I haven't always been able to say that about AEW stories. So
Mhm.
I'm very interested to see where it goes. I think that the way that they closed the show tonight was definitely a big swing. They knew that they were going to push some buttons and create a big moment, and I think that they did. I think that it's a testament to the fact that this probably could have been a largely forgettable show if not for that show closing angle. But instead, we're left talking about it, and I think that we'll be talking about the fallout from it for many weeks to come.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm like I said, I'm just hoping they stick the landing because the last time we had a big story, I could even go if you want to call two quote unquote big AEW stories was, you know, Tony Khan taking the Meltzer slash TK driver in the middle of the ring, which
Mhm.
I was really excited for at the time. Didn't really quite go where we thought it was going to go, and it didn't get as big as we thought it was going to get. And then, of course, the reveal last year, and we've come full circle on it with the end of the Adam Cole and MJF storyline, which, like I said, as mangled as it was, everyone wanted to see what the payoff was going to be, and then Cole gets hurt, and then MJF goes away, and it just kind of disappeared until tonight when it's making its second resurrection, if we want to call it. So, um, so yeah, like I said, I'm hopeful, and we'll see if they stick the landing. That's what I'm worried about.
for sure. Well, we did it. We made it through all 9 matches on the main show. We did it in under 2 hours, so I'm proud of us. I didn't burn the place down on my very first venture, hosting Wrestling Night in America, so that is a good thing. Want to tell you real quickly, if you're not already, now is a great opportunity to become a PW Torch VIP member. There's going to be so much to talk about in the wake of tonight's post show angle, and the VIP Torch crew will certainly have you covered when it comes to all of that. You get ad free podcasts, VIP only podcasts, 35 years of podcasts and newsletter archives, the weekly PDF newsletter. Ad-free version of pwtorch.com. You get to listen to some excellent VIP podcasts, including The Fix with Todd Martin. You get everything with Rich and Wade, and the post pay-per-view and PLE roundtable podcasts. Those are some of my favorites, and one that I will occasionally co-host with Wade and the gang as well. You also get ad-free versions of Greg Parks Out Loud. A shout out to the former host of Wrestling Night in America, Greg Parks. Certainly would be remiss if I didn't mention him. So before we go, Tony, go ahead and once again plug your work for the Torch and where people can find you.
Yeah. ProWrestling.net and PW Torch contribute. Should have something up probably by Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest for tonight's hits and misses. So have a lot to think about. This is actually probably very therapeutic before I write that column. For ProWrestling.net, I do write Tony's takes basically once a month, give or take. Get to do these shows whenever possible at Tony Donofrio or Tony Donofrio on X/Twitter and on Threads. And yeah, it was a fun night, and you're not too bad for a Ravens fan. I'll give you that.
Appreciate it. Oh, that's right. You're from Pittsburgh, aren't you?
Absolutely, that's right.
Oh
That's right. We made it
man,
through the
how
show.
did
We're
we get?
good.
How did we get through this? Listen,
Uh,
you know what?
are
You
you
know
from
what? Here's the
DC
thing.
originally? Is this what?
No. I
Or
just happen
Maryland?
to. I
Okay.
I'm a born Mainer. Just never
Okay.
never was a fan of the Patriots. Started watching football when I got to college. Happened to be Joe Flacco and Matt Ryan's rookie years,
Mhm.
and I liked both of them. And I just happened to get more Ravens games on TV, and it stuck. I don't know. I mean, there's not much else to it. I here's the thing. When it comes to the AFC North, I have a healthy respect for the Steelers that I cannot extend to the Browns and the Bengals. So
Actually, I actually can reciprocate that. That makes sense. Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
so yeah, so we find some common ground there.
Yeah.
Uh, awesome. Well, you can find my work for PW Torch, the post PLE roundtable discussions. I will occasionally join Wade and Todd Martin and whomever else is involved on those. We had a really cool one last week for WWE Bad Blood, where I sat down with Wade and Sean Radican to talk about that show. So check that out if you are a VIP member. Um, I also cover all WWE premium live events as well as AEW pay per views for the Torch. You can find my analysis for those throughout the show and after the show. In fact, as soon as we're done here, I'm going to finish up my analysis for tonight's pay per view. So my night is not over, even though we're wrapping up here. And you can also find me occasionally co hosting the Wade Keller Pro Wrestling post shows for Raw, SmackDown, and Dynamite, alongside PW Torch editor Wade Keller. So that is going to do it for myself and Tony. Thank you so much for joining us here and for listening. If you are doing so afterward, and just I will I'll bring back a little thing that Greg used to do. Um, I can't say it's Sunday, so it's not Wrestling Night in America on Sunday because we're Saturday. But if it's a post evening pay per view or PLE. It's Wrestling Night in America.